Hiro lived in a world of rigid structures and mathematical certainty. To him, the beauty of a cathedral lay in its load-bearing walls, and the soul of a building was found in its steel skeleton. He was a man obsessed with the permanence of stone and the precision of a blueprint. As a top architectural student, his desk was a sanctuary of blueprints and empty coffee cups. He viewed emotions as messy variables that could collapse a well-designed life. Ambition was his only compass. Beside him was Kaori, a presence he treated as part of the furniture. She had been there since childhood, a soft constant in his stark world. She sharpened his pencils, folded his laundry, and provided warm meals while he lost himself in floor plans. Kaori moved through his life like a gentle breeze, silent and often unnoticed. She was the warmth in his cold apartment, the only color in his monochrome existence. She never demanded attention, knowing a simple greeting might shatter the glass of his concentration. Her eyes, once bright with shared secrets, had become pools of weary patience. She would quietly place a bowl of steaming ramen on his desk, her fingers lingering near his hand, hoping for a touch that never came. Hiro barely grunted a thanks, his eyes fixed on the blueprints. He saw her devotion as a given, an inherent law of his universe rather than a gift she chose to give. Neglect was a slow erosion rather than a sudden storm. He forgot her 22nd birthday, leaving her to sit alone with a cake, waiting for a call that never rang. When she tried to share her dreams of visiting the coast or opening a small gallery, he cut her off. Calling such whims distractions from the pursuit of excellence, memories meant nothing to his current ambition. He silenced her voice until she stopped trying to speak, her personality fading into a quiet shadow. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Even as her physical decline became impossible to ignore, Hiro chose to look away. He didn't notice the way her breath hitched when she carried groceries or the paleness hollowing her cheeks. He heard her coughing in the kitchen, a harsh sound that shook her frame. The rattling of a pill bottle in her pocket became background noise he tuned out. Irritated, he told her she was just tired and should sleep so she could stay sharp for his needs. He didn't see the red stain on her napkin, nor did he ask about the hospital envelope in her bag. He was too busy building monuments to notice the girl crumbling right beside him. The breaking point came during the National Architecture Competition. Hiro won the grand prize, a victory that would cement his career. He stood on stage, basking in the spotlights, shaking hands with industry giants. He celebrated with strangers, drinking expensive wine and discussing the future of urban design. He completely forgot Kaori was waiting at their favorite restaurant. She sat there for 4 hours, a small wrapped box on the table between 2 empty chairs. The box contained a gift he would never see. The staff stacked chairs around her, but she stayed, eyes fixed on the door until the hope in her eyes finally died. When Hiro returned long after midnight, he expected the usual comfort. Instead, the apartment was shrouded in heavy darkness. The air was cold, devoid of the vanilla scent she always carried. The realization began to sink in like ice water. He called her name, but only silence answered. He walked into the kitchen, his heart thudding with a strange, unfamiliar anxiety. On the table sat a single silver key. Beside it was a note written in her delicate hand. It held only one word. "Goodbye." Hiro looked toward the closet and saw the door ajar. Every piece of her clothing was gone. The space she had occupied for years was now just a hollow, silent void. Hiro stood in the bedroom, the silence ringing in his ears like a physical weight. He stared at the empty hangers in the closet, their skeletal frames swaying in the draft. It was a childish game, he told himself, a desperate bid for attention. Surely, she was staying with a cousin, waiting for him to call and apologize for the missed dinner. He refused to let panic settle, anchoring himself to logic. He set his alarm for the morning, convinced that by sunrise, the familiar scent of jasmine tea would fill the hallway. But the morning brought only the pale light of a city that didn't care about his solitude. There was no tea, no soft footsteps, and no Kaori. Days bled into a week, and the structure of Hiro's life began to fracture. Without Kaori to manage the mundane details, his world descended into chaos. Dust settled on his drafting table, and piles of discarded sketches overflowed from the bin. He realized he didn't even know where the laundry detergent was kept or how to pay the utility bills she had always handled. He missed an important meeting because he couldn't find his favorite blazer. Every corner of the apartment mocked him. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a loud, accusing scream. He caught himself turning to share a thought about a design, only to face cold, empty air. Desperation drove him into the streets. He visited the boutique where Kaori had worked, hoping to find her behind the counter. Instead, the manager looked at him with cold disdain. She told him Kaori had resigned a month ago, mentioning she was preparing for a journey from which she might not return. Hiro's heart hammered. He called their mutual friends, but their voices were distant. They knew she was gone, but not where. One friend whispered that she needed to find herself before she ran out of time, a phrase that echoed in Hiro's mind like a jagged piece of glass cutting through his denial. Returning to the apartment, Hiro felt like a stranger. He remembered the silver key on the kitchen table and finally understood it was an invitation. He searched the bedroom, pulling boxes from the top shelf. Tucked behind his old architectural journals, he found a small locked wooden chest. The key slid into the mechanism with a click that sounded like a gunshot. Inside lay a thick stack of envelopes, all addressed to him, none of them ever sent. As he opened the first one, the delicate handwriting he had so often ignored began to tell a story he was never supposed to hear. The letters were a chronicle of a slow farewell. Kaori described the chest pains and the sterile hospital rooms she visited while he was busy winning awards. She had been diagnosed with a terminal heart condition, a ticking clock she kept secret to avoid burdening his career. She had stayed silent to protect his focus, sacrificing her need for comfort so his blueprints could remain perfect. Hiro felt a wave of nausea. He remembered her coughing fits and how he had dismissively told her to get more sleep. Every memory was now a blade. He had been building monuments of cold, unfeeling stone, while the only person who truly loved him was fading away into the mist. Deep in the box, Hiro found a crumpled train ticket receipt, purchased the morning she disappeared. The destination was a small coastal town they had visited once as children, back when his heart wasn't made of concrete. The departure time had been hours before he found her note. His hands shook so violently the paper nearly tore. She hadn't just left. She had gone back to the beginning to face the end, without a single thought for his career, his pending projects, or his looming academic deadlines. Hiro grabbed his worn coat and ran frantically toward the door, her ghostly voice finally becoming much louder than his own cold, unyielding and singular ambition. Hiro abandoned his exams and the prestigious life he had planned. He boarded the train with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of his own monumental arrogance. As the city melted into the coast, he saw a stranger in the window, a man who traded his soul for blueprints. The rain lashed against the station as he arrived, a cold, biting reminder of the storms he had allowed Kaori to face alone. He sprinted through the muddy streets, his lungs burning, his heart hammering in a rhythm of pure panic. He didn't care about the legacy he had chased. He only cared about the girl who had been his sanctuary. He found her in a small clinic perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. The air smelled of salt and antiseptic. When he pushed open the door to her room, the world seemed to tilt. Kaori was sitting by the window, her frame so slight she seemed almost translucent against the fading sunlight. She was watching the waves, her expression one of profound peace that Hiro had never witnessed before. When her eyes met his, there was no resentment or betrayal, only a weary, gentle, and heartbreaking recognition. Hiro collapsed at her feet, his frantic words of apology pouring out like a flood. He promised her everything, a home, his undivided attention, and a life where her voice was the only one that mattered. He would burn his entire career to the ground if it meant keeping her. But Kaori only smiled, a small, sad movement that broke his heart more than any scream could. She took his hand, her touch as light as a falling leaf. She explained that her departure wasn't born of anger or a desire for revenge. She had left because she realized she had vanished long ago. She had become a silent ghost, a background figure in his life, until her own quiet desires vanished. She told him that she had loved him until it hurt to breathe, but in the end, she had to choose to be Kaori instead of being Hiro's shadow. She had come to the sea to reclaim her own identity before the final darkness took her. She didn't want to be a footnote in his biography. She wanted to be the vibrant protagonist of her own final chapter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple, she made one final request. She didn't ask for a doctor or a miracle. She asked him to draw her portrait. Hiro reached into his leather bag, pulling out the charcoal and paper he usually reserved for his rigid mathematical and sterile designs. But this time, he didn't draw straight lines or perfect angles. With shaking hands and blurred vision, he captured the softness of her face, the wisdom in her eyes, and the quiet dignity of her spirit. He drew her as the very center of the universe, the only structure that mattered. For the first time, he saw her, not as a convenience, but as a masterpiece. Kaori passed away peacefully that night, the tide carrying her spirit away just as the moon rose. Hiro was left in the sudden deafening silence, clutching the drawing that was now the only piece of her he had left. In the years that followed, Hiro's name became synonymous with global architectural brilliance. He built towers that touched the clouds and bridges that spanned impossible gaps. Yet, he lived a solitary life, his fame a cold comfort in an empty house. His greatest achievement, however, sat on a lonely cliff by the sea. It was a simple monument of stone and glass, designed to capture the sunset. It was a place of reflection, a silent apology carved into the earth. It was dedicated to the light I ignored, a testament to the fact that the most vital structures aren't built of stone, but of the love we are too blind to see.